Private Emily Carter stepped off the military transport bus and looked around the training grounds at Fort Bragg. The morning air was cold, the kind that bit through your skin and made your breath visible. Around her, dozens of new recruits were stretching, laughing, and talking loudly, full of nervous energy. Emily stood quietly at the edge of the group, holding her duffel bag close. Her uniform was clean, her boots perfectly laced, and yet something about her seemed different, quieter, more careful, as if she didn't want anyone to notice her. When the instructor called everyone to line up for their first physical training, or PT session, Emily moved to the back. She wasn't slow, just cautious. Her movements were measured, almost too precise. Some recruits noticed and exchanged glances. In a place where confidence and loudness often ruled, her silence stood out. "All right, recruits," the sergeant shouted. "We'll start with a 2-mile run. You finish under 16 minutes, you pass. Fall behind, and you'll be running until sunset." The group groaned, but Emily simply nodded. She tied her hair into a tight bun and took her place at the starting line. When the whistle blew, everyone sprinted forward. The sound of boots hitting the dirt echoed through the field. Emily started steady, not fast. Within the first few minutes, others began to overtake her. She could hear their laughter and their heavy breathing as they ran past. By the halfway point, Emily was already near the back, her breathing sharp and uneven. "Come on, Carter," a recruit called out mockingly. "You can't quit on day one." Emily didn't respond. She focused on her steps, counting them quietly in her head. 1, 2, 3, 4. Every few meters, her right hand twitched slightly, like she was fighting pain or an old injury. When she finally crossed the finish line, most of the group was already catching their breath. Emily bent forward, her hands on her knees, sweat dripping from her forehead. She didn't look up when she heard the laughter. "Guess someone didn't train enough before joining," one recruit said loudly. Another added, "Maybe she thought this was yoga camp." The small group laughed again. Emily just nodded silently, not offering an excuse. The sergeant walked over, frowning. "Private Carter, you finished in 23 minutes. That's well below standard. Any reason for that?" Emily straightened her posture and looked him in the eye. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Old injury, sir. Still getting my strength back." The sergeant sighed. "Then you'd better heal fast. The army doesn't wait for anyone." He turned and barked new orders at the group. As everyone moved to the next drill, Emily took a moment to stretch her shoulder. The movement was slow and stiff, like she was careful not to trigger something. Her fingers brushed against her upper arm where the sleeve of her uniform ended. A small habit she didn't even notice herself doing. She joined the rest for push-ups. Again she struggled to keep up. Her arms trembled halfway down, and by the 10th push-up, she had to stop. The soldier next to her grinned. "You sure you signed up for the right job?" he whispered. Emily ignored him, pressed her palms harder into the ground, and forced herself through 5 more. By the end of the morning, everyone was exhausted. Most were complaining about sore muscles or dry throats. Emily stayed quiet, sitting a few steps away from the others, tying and readying her bootlaces. She watched them, how they joked, how they competed, and for a brief moment, her eyes softened. She remembered what it was like to be part of a unit like that. But that was a long time ago. When lunch was called, she picked up her tray and sat at the far end of the mess hall. A few others passed her table and whispered things under their breath. "Look who's sitting alone," one said. "Probably doesn't even make it past the first month." Emily ate slowly, her mind elsewhere. She wasn't here to prove herself to anyone. She had already done that years ago in places most of these recruits had never even heard of. But none of that mattered here. Not anymore. She was starting over, that was the deal. No one knew who she used to be, and she intended to keep it that way. Later that evening, while the others laughed in their bunks, Emily sat on hers quietly. She opened a small notebook and wrote something down. A series of numbers and short notes that didn't seem to make sense. Then she closed it and tucked it under her pillow. When the lights went out, she lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. Her arm ached. the same one she had been careful with all day. She reached up and rubbed it gently through the fabric of her uniform. Beneath the cloth under her skin lay an old scar and something else. A tattoo no one had seen yet. It wasn't just a mark. It was a memory, one she could never erase. Outside, the night was quiet except for the sound of distant boots and the whistle of the wind through the trees. Inside the barracks, Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would bring more pain, more training, and probably more laughter from the others. But she didn't mind, because Emily Carter wasn't who they thought she was. And soon enough they would find out. The next morning, the sun hadn't even fully risen when the loud whistle of the drill sergeant echoed through the barracks. "Wake up, recruits! PT starts in 10 minutes!" he shouted. Everyone jumped out of bed, rushing to get dressed. The air was cold, and the smell of wet grass drifted in from outside. Emily Carter was already awake before the whistle. She had been sitting on her bunk, lacing her boots carefully. She didn't speak to anyone, just tied them tight, tucked her notebook back under her pillow, and walked out quietly. Outside, the rest of the group gathered in formation. Some were laughing and teasing each other, still half asleep but trying to sound tough. Emily stood at the end of the line again, her face calm and unreadable. 2 miles again today, the sergeant barked. I want to see improvement. No excuses. When the whistle blew, everyone took off running. The ground was muddy from last night's rain, and their boots splashed through puddles. The group quickly spread out. The strong runners were already ahead, showing off. The slower ones tried their best to keep up. Emily kept her steady pace, breathing evenly, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. After only a few minutes, she started to feel the familiar pain in her right arm and shoulder. It wasn't sharp, just a dull ache that spread with every movement. She didn't let it show on her face. She had learned long ago how to hide pain. "Come on, Carter!" someone shouted from behind. It was Private Jenkins, a tall, loud recruit who loved to make jokes at everyone's expense. "You running or sightseeing?" The others laughed. Emily didn't look back. She just kept running. But the laughter grew louder as more people joined in. "Maybe she's waiting for a taxi," another recruit yelled. "Don't fall asleep back there," someone else added. Emily heard every word, but she didn't respond. Her steps were slow but steady. She kept her rhythm 1, 2, 3, 4. Her boots splashed through the mud. Her breath came out in short bursts, and her mind stayed quiet. By the time she reached the halfway mark, the others were far ahead. The sergeant stood near the finish line with his stopwatch, shaking his head. "Carter, move it. You're dragging the whole unit down," he shouted. Emily pushed harder, her heart pounding. She remembered harder days. Long nights with no food, no rest, no light, but she kept going. This was nothing compared to what she had already survived. When she finally crossed the line, almost everyone had finished and was catching their breath. Emily's legs trembled, and sweat rolled down her neck. She bent forward, trying to control her breathing. Jenkins smirked and said loudly, "Didn't know we were running a marathon, Carter." The recruits around him laughed again. Emily straightened up, gave him a short nod, and said softly, "Guess I'll train harder tomorrow." Then she walked past him to join the others. Her voice wasn't angry or defensive, just calm, almost too calm. That made Jenkins frown. He wanted her to react, but she didn't. During the push-up session, things got worse. Emily managed the first few easily, but soon her right arm started shaking again. Pain shot through her shoulder. She gritted her teeth and continued, forcing herself to keep up. The recruits around her noticed and smirked. "What's the matter, Carter?" one said. "Too heavy," another whispered. "Maybe she just needs someone to carry her." The laughter returned. Even the sergeant sighed in frustration. "You need to toughen up, Carter," he said. "This isn't a rehab center." Emily didn't reply. She finished her set, even though her arms felt like fire. When the sergeant told them to move to sit-ups, she went without hesitation. The rest of the morning was filled with more drills, climbing ropes, lifting weights, crawling under barbed wire. Emily did everything quietly, keeping to herself. Every mistake she made drew another round of snickering. At lunch, when the others sat together laughing about their day, Emily took her tray and sat alone again. Jenkins sat nearby and made sure everyone could hear him. "Hey Carter," he said with a grin. "What's your excuse this time? Bad dreams? Ghost pains?" A few others chuckled. Emily looked up at him and said in a quiet but steady voice, "Old injury. It doesn't matter." He laughed harder. "Old injury, huh? What, did you trip on a yoga mat?" The group burst into laughter. Emily didn't flinch. She just picked up her tray and walked away. There was no anger in her steps, no shame, just quiet strength. That confused Jenkins more than anything else. He couldn't understand why she didn't fight back. After lunch, they were sent to a classroom for a briefing. Colonel James Holloway entered the room. A tall, serious man with sharp eyes. Everyone stood up straight immediately. The colonel didn't speak much. He just scanned the room slowly. When his eyes passed over Emily, he paused for a second, as if something about her caught his attention. Then he continued speaking about discipline and teamwork. Emily sat perfectly still, listening carefully, taking notes while others whispered or fidgeted. The colonel noticed that too. When the day finally ended, the recruits were exhausted. They returned to the barracks, complaining about how tough the drills were. Emily stayed quiet, cleaning her boots and folding her uniform neatly. Her hands were shaking slightly from fatigue, but she didn't stop. Jenkins, still full of energy, threw a ball across the room and said, "Hey Carter, maybe tomorrow you can actually run with us instead of sightseeing." More laughter followed. This time Emily looked up. For a brief second, there was something in her eyes. Not anger, not fear, but something sharp and cold, like steel. Jenkins stopped laughing. He couldn't explain why, but that single look made him uncomfortable. Emily didn't say a word. She just finished cleaning her boots, put them neatly by her bed, and lay down. Outside, the camp was quiet again. Inside, the recruits drifted off to sleep one by one. Emily stared at the ceiling, her arms still aching. The laughter from earlier echoed faintly in her memory, but she didn't care. She knew what they didn't. Tomorrow, or maybe someday soon, everything would change. The same people laughing at her now would learn the truth, and when they did, they wouldn't laugh again. The next day, the training field was filled with the sounds of boots hitting the ground, shouts from the drill sergeants, and the occasional groan of a tired recruit. Emily Carter stood in formation, calm as ever, her posture straight and precise. Around her, the other recruits were stretching, joking, and trying to psych themselves up for the next grueling session. Some still whispered about her, making jokes from the previous days, but Emily didn't react. She didn't need to. From the edge of the field, Colonel James Holloway observed quietly. He wasn't here to participate. He rarely involved himself in daily PT sessions, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. Most officers would have glanced over Emily, assuming she was just another slow recruit struggling to keep up. But Holloway noticed something subtle. The way Emily scanned the perimeter as she moved, the way her head tilted slightly when she listened to orders, almost as if she were calculating every step, every sound, every possibility. The colonel's eyes narrowed. He had seen that posture before, the posture of someone trained to survive in dangerous situations, someone who had been in combat more intense than standard military exercises. But she looked young, almost fragile, and yet there was an energy about her, a quiet alertness that set her apart. As the whistle blew, the recruits began their run. Emily moved steadily, keeping pace at the back, letting the faster runners surge ahead. The others began their usual teasing. "Slowpoke," one called. "Watch out, she's about to fall over," another shouted, and a few more laughed. Emily ignored them, focusing instead on her breathing and her form. Every few steps, her eyes flicked to the surroundings, trees, fences, and the open fields beyond. Holloway watched this carefully from the sidelines. Most recruits ran blindly, following the group, but Emily was aware. Every sound, every movement of her fellow soldiers, she absorbed. It was almost instinctual. By the halfway point, Emily's pace had her at the rear again. The sergeant's voice boomed. "Carter, move it. Stop dragging the unit down." Emily pushed herself harder, her legs burning, her heart pounding. She felt the familiar ache in her shoulder and side, but she ignored it. She had ignored worse injuries in the past. Years ago, she had trained in conditions far more extreme, in situations where failure meant real danger. Those memories were buried deep, but they never left her entirely. The run ended, and Emily crossed the finish line last, as expected. The usual laughter erupted behind her, louder this time. The recruits enjoyed mocking her now, seeing her struggle again. "Hey Carter, need a ride?" Someone joked. Another shouted, "Maybe the colonel will push you in a wheelchair next time." Emily straightened her uniform and looked toward the sergeant. "I'll keep improving, sir," she said calmly. There was no embarrassment, no anger, just quiet determination. The words had weight in them that the recruits couldn't measure. After the run, the group moved on to other exercises. Push-ups, sit-ups, and rope climbing. Emily struggled in some areas, especially with her arm that had old injuries, but she never stopped. Every effort she made was deliberate and controlled. The recruits who laughed at her were growing frustrated. They expected weakness, not resilience. During a brief water break, Colonel Holloway stepped closer. Most officers would never interact directly during a PT session, but he watched Emily with interest. He didn't say anything, just observed. He noticed the small details, the way she adjusted her uniform before each exercise, the way she didn't flinch at commands, the way she calculated her movements to avoid strain while still performing. Most recruits would have panicked or reacted emotionally under the teasing, but she was steady. He remembered seeing this once before, years ago, in a far more dangerous setting. There was a type of soldier trained to endure extreme physical and mental challenges. These soldiers had instincts that allowed them to survive where others would fail. Holloway felt a chill. Could it be that this young recruit in front of him, who struggled to finish a simple PT run, was one of those soldiers? He decided to watch more closely. As the training continued, Emily's small, calculated movements and her sharp awareness became more apparent. She didn't just perform the exercises. She evaluated them, noted weaknesses in technique, adjusted her posture, and controlled her breathing to maximize efficiency. It was subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but Holloway had seen it before. At the end of the morning, the recruits gathered for instructions. Emily quietly took her place at the back, listening. She didn't speak, didn't laugh, didn't complain. Her attention was on every word, every gesture, every order. Colonel Holloway, watching from the sidelines, made a note in his mind. Most recruits who struggled physically also struggled mentally under pressure. Emily, however, did not. She was alert, calculating, and disciplined, a rare combination. Her performance today had not impressed the other soldiers, but it had captured his attention. By the time training ended and the recruits returned to the barracks, Emily was exhausted. She walked quietly, carrying her gear, her expression calm. Behind her, the whispers and laughter continued, but Holloway had already made a decision. He needed to learn more about this recruit. That evening, while the other recruits celebrated small victories and joked about their day, Emily sat quietly in her bunk, methodically checking her gear and cleaning her boots. Her arm ached, but she ignored it, used to discomfort. She thought about tomorrow, about what the next training session would bring, and about how long she could keep her past a secret. Holloway, from a distance, continued to watch. He didn't speak to her yet, didn't approach. But he knew one thing. Emily Carter was not like the other recruits. Something about her past, her training, and her discipline made her stand out, even when she seemed weak. He had seen soldiers like her before, the kind who could survive anything, endure everything, and come out stronger. And he had a feeling that soon, he would discover exactly why she moved, acted, and carried herself the way she did. For Emily, the teasing and laughter of the recruits didn't matter. She had survived worse, and she was ready for whatever came next. But for Colonel Holloway, the quiet, observant recruit at the back of the line had become the most interesting person on the training field, and he couldn't wait to see what she would do next. The day's PT drills were tougher than usual. The recruits were exhausted, their muscles sore from the morning run and the previous day's exercises. Emily Carter lined up with the rest of the unit, standing quietly at the back as always. Her uniform was neat, her boots polished, and her face calm. The other recruits were joking and laughing, trying to lift their own spirits as they prepared for the push-up session. "All right, everyone," the sergeant barked. "Next drill. Push-ups until I say stop. Show me strength, show me discipline. No excuses." Emily took a deep breath and got into position. She started strong, completing the first few sets without difficulty. But as she lowered her body for the 10th push-up, a familiar ache shot through her shoulder and arm. It wasn't severe enough to stop her, but it slowed her down. She felt the muscles tremble, the joints protesting, and she had to pause for a brief moment. A few recruits nearby noticed and immediately whispered, then laughed openly. "She's at it again. Need a hand?" one said. "Maybe she's allergic to exercise," another added. The teasing didn't stop there. Some recruits walked past, smirking. "Carter, I didn't know push-ups could be so dangerous," one said, laughing. "Better call the medic before you hurt yourself." Emily ignored them. She had learned long ago that arguing with bullies never helped. She stayed focused, lowering herself again, counting each movement carefully. Her breathing was steady, her eyes forward, but inside, she felt the familiar flash of frustration at the assumptions everyone made about her. After the push-ups, the sergeant called out, "All right, Carter, any reason you're not keeping up? Speak up." Emily straightened and looked him in the eye. Her voice was calm, measured, and confident. "Old damage, sir. Nerve trauma," she said softly. The words barely registered to some of the recruits. "Nerve trauma?" someone muttered. "What is she? A walking hospital?" The laughter erupted again, louder this time. "Old damage. That's a good one," another shouted. Emily didn't smile or react. She didn't need to explain herself further. To most, it sounded like an excuse, something to avoid hard work. But to her, it was truth, and she knew that one day, her truth would speak louder than any teasing. The sergeant sighed, clearly frustrated, and waved for the next drill to begin. "Then you'd better heal fast, Carter," he said. "This army doesn't wait for anyone." As the recruits moved to the next exercise, Emily stayed slightly behind, stretching her arm carefully. She flexed her fingers and rotated her shoulder slowly, being cautious with every movement. A small part of her smiled inwardly. They thought they knew her, thought she was weak, but they had no idea. From the sidelines, Colonel Holloway observed quietly. He had been watching Emily closely since the previous day. Most recruits who struggled physically also struggled under pressure or gave up when teased. But Emily's reaction was different. She didn't argue, she didn't cry, and she didn't retreat. She stayed calm and continued. Her movements were deliberate, her mind alert, and her posture always ready. Holloway's eyes narrowed. He could see it now, the way Emily's awareness extended beyond her own body. Every glance, every adjustment, every careful move told a story. She wasn't just performing the drills. She was calculating, assessing, anticipating. Her skill wasn't obvious to the casual observer, but he recognized it immediately. Later, when the recruits were gathering for the next exercise, Holloway stepped closer to Emily. "Show me your arm," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was an intensity to it that caught her attention. Emily hesitated for a brief moment. She wasn't used to revealing her history. Not here, not yet. Slowly, she rolled up her sleeve, exposing her upper arm. There, faint but unmistakable, was the black snake tattoo wrapped around a dagger. The other recruits didn't notice, they were joking among themselves, but Colonel Holloway froze. His face went pale. He had seen that symbol before. It was not decorative or casual. It was the insignia of Shadow Viper, a covert black ops unit known for secret missions, high risk, and few survivors. Only a small number of soldiers had earned it, and it carried weight that most civilians or even regular military personnel could not understand. Emily's calm expression remained, but now the room felt different. There was tension in the air. The colonel took a step back, his mind racing as he processed what he had just seen. He had not expected to encounter someone with that background in a regular PT class. The other recruits continued laughing, unaware of the significance of the tattoo. But Holloway knew immediately, this was not an ordinary soldier. This was someone who had faced extreme danger, someone trained to endure hardship far beyond the normal limits of the military. Emily lowered her sleeve again, and the colonel's gaze remained fixed on her. He didn't need to ask questions. The small nod she gave him was enough. She wasn't hiding her past. She simply knew when and to whom it should be revealed. The room's atmosphere shifted subtly. Even without the others noticing, there was a sense of quiet authority around Emily now. She didn't have to speak, didn't have to prove anything. The snake mark had done that for her. By the end of the PT session, the teasing and laughter from the other recruits had faded slightly. Some were curious, some were confused, and some just felt a strange respect that they didn't fully understand. Emily didn't celebrate or announce anything. She simply returned to her place quietly, her arm aching slightly, but her mind calm. Colonel Holloway watched her carefully as she moved. He knew that the teasing would continue, the recruits would continue to misunderstand her abilities. But that would not last long. One day they would all see who she truly was. And when that day came, no one would laugh at Emily Carter again. That evening, as the barracks grew quiet, Emily sat on her bunk, reflecting. Her arm throbbed faintly, a reminder of the past and the risks she had faced. But she didn't mind. She had endured worse. She had survived worse. And tomorrow, she would face the challenges of the day again, confident in her strength, her skills, and her hidden history that the rest of the world was not yet ready to see. The next morning, the air at Fort Bragg was crisp, the sky a pale blue stretching over the training grounds. Emily Carter joined the formation as usual, her uniform neat, boots polished and face calm. The other recruits were restless, still teasing her from the previous days, whispering and laughing under their breaths. But Emily didn't notice. She wasn't here to compete for attention or approval. She was here to survive, to endure, and to do what she always did. Keep moving forward, no matter what. The sergeant blew the whistle, signaling the start of the morning run. The recruits took off, their boots pounding against the soft ground. Emily stayed at her steady pace at the back, her breathing controlled, her eyes scanning the terrain. She could hear the usual snickers and mocking comments from the others. "Slowpoke," one called. "Maybe she needs a map to finish," another shouted. Laughter followed, but Emily didn't flinch. Her steps were careful, precise, and steady. The ache in her shoulder and the stiffness in her side reminded her of her limits. But she ignored them. She had endured worse than this in places far from here, under circumstances far more dangerous. When the run ended, Emily was once again last. The other recruits jeered, pointing fingers, making jokes about her fragile condition. "Hey Carter, do you want a medal for just showing up?" one shouted. Emily's face remained calm. She bent forward slightly, hands on her knees, trying to steady her breathing. Then she straightened up and looked at the sergeant when he barked, "Private Carter, any reason you can't keep up? Speak up." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Old damage, sir. Nerve trauma." A few recruits nearby laughed again, assuming it was just another excuse. "Nerve trauma? What's next, walking on crutches?" one muttered. Emily ignored them. She didn't need to justify herself. But as she rolled up her sleeve to adjust her uniform, the faintest hint of a black tattoo peeked from under the fabric. It was just a flash, and most recruits didn't notice. But Colonel Holloway, standing nearby to observe the session, did. His eyes narrowed. Emily paused for a moment and then, deliberately, rolled her sleeve fully up. There it was, a black snake coiled around a dagger, etched with skill and precision. The tattoo wasn't large, but its significance was unmistakable to anyone who recognized it. Holloway's face went pale. His mind raced as he recalled the insignia. Shadow Viper, the Black Ops unit known for its dangerous missions and secrecy. Only a few soldiers had ever earned the right to wear it. Most of them were legendary, and some didn't survive the missions. Seeing the symbol here, on a quiet, seemingly struggling recruit, sent a chill through him. The other recruits were still laughing and talking, completely unaware of what they were witnessing. To them, it was just a tattoo. To Holloway, it was a signal of elite training, of lethal skill, of someone who had survived extreme danger. Emily's expression didn't change. She didn't gloat. She didn't announce her past. She simply let the tattoo speak for her. Holloway took a step closer, studying her carefully. She had the posture, the calm, the endurance, all signs of someone trained to survive, to fight, and to remain alert under pressure. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. The room seemed to shift subtly. Even the sergeant paused, sensing something in the air, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. There was a weight in Emily's presence now, a silent authority that had nothing to do with words or commands. Emily lowered her sleeve slowly, but the impression remained. Holloway knew instantly. This was no ordinary recruit. This was someone who had faced life-or-death situations, who had been trained for missions that most soldiers couldn't even imagine. He understood why she moved the way she did, why she ignored the teasing, why she seemed to carry herself with such quiet precision. The other recruits continued their exercises, oblivious to what had just happened. But Holloway's perception of Emily had changed completely. He realized that the teasing, the slow PT times, the excuses, all of that was irrelevant. They had judged her without knowing anything. He was certain now that she had endured far more than any of them. Emily finished the morning drills, moving with care, her arm aching but her determination stronger than ever. She didn't celebrate, she didn't react to the colonel's recognition, and she didn't allow herself to feel superior. For her, this was just another day. The tattoo was a symbol, yes, but it was also a reminder of what she had survived and what she was capable of enduring. After the exercises, the recruits returned to the barracks. There were whispers, some curiosity, and some lingering jokes, but Emily remained unaffected. She carefully cleaned her gear, checked her boots, and prepared for the next session. She had already been through far worse in places far from this base. The laughter of unknowing soldiers was meaningless to her. Colonel Holloway stayed on the field for a while, watching her. He made a mental note to review her background later. There were questions he wanted answers to, questions about training, missions, and experiences that didn't fit the profile of a normal recruit. He could tell that the snake mark was just the tip of the iceberg. Emily didn't speak of it, didn't hint at her past, and didn't let the attention disturb her. For now, she remained the quiet, resilient soldier at the back of the line, focused on her tasks, enduring the teasing, and preparing for what was coming next. But Holloway now knew. Emily Carter was far more than she appeared. The day ended, the barracks grew quiet, and Emily sat on her bunk, tending to her shoulder and reflecting silently. The snake tattoo was more than ink. It was proof of survival, proof of training, proof of a past that would one day speak for itself. And when that day came, those who laughed would understand, but not today. The afternoon sun was high, casting long shadows across the training field. Emily Carter walked calmly among the other recruits, her movements quiet and deliberate. The usual laughter and teasing from the earlier sessions had faded into murmurs. Something had shifted, though most of the soldiers didn't realize why. Their jokes, which had been sharp and loud just that morning, were now softer, uncertain. Even the sergeant seemed slightly more cautious around her. Emily didn't seek attention. She didn't need to. The snake tattoo on her arm had already spoken for her, though the others didn't yet understand it. She moved with purpose, completing each drill with controlled precision. Push-ups, sit-ups, obstacle courses. She did them all not quickly, but flawlessly in technique. Every step, every motion was calculated, practiced, and efficient. From the edge of the field, Colonel Holloway watched closely. His eyes followed her every move, noting the subtle details others missed. The way she adjusted her posture to protect an old injury without losing performance. The way she scanned the environment instinctively, not looking for trouble, but for awareness. The way she interacted minimally with others, yet carried herself with quiet authority. Holloway had seen many soldiers in his years, Some were strong, some were fast, some were intelligent. Very few combined all three with such silent confidence. Emily was one of them. After the drills, Holloway motioned for the recruits to rest. He walked over to Emily, his steps deliberate. "Private Carter," he said, his voice low but firm. Emily straightened instantly, returning his nod with a measured, calm posture. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but she always gave attention and respect where it was due. "Come with me," Holloway said quietly. Emily followed, not hesitant, not questioning. They walked toward a small secluded area near the edge of the base. The other recruits watched briefly, curiosity piqued, but didn't approach. Holloway studied her quietly for a moment. "You were with them, weren't you?" he asked, nodding slightly toward her arm where the tattoo peeked from under the uniform sleeve. Emily didn't flinch. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. That single motion carried more weight than words could convey. Holloway didn't need further explanation. The truth was evident. This was a soldier who had endured missions that most could not imagine. Missions that demanded not just skill, but absolute focus, discipline, and courage. "You don't have to explain everything," he said. "I already know enough. Your movements, your reactions. It's not ordinary training that shaped you. You've been somewhere far more dangerous." Emily's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Holloway's recognition was enough. Back on the training field, the other recruits were beginning to sense a change. The quiet observation by the colonel, the subtle acknowledgement of Emily's abilities, it unsettled them. They had laughed and mocked without thinking, but now their jokes felt shallow, meaningless. They couldn't place what had shifted, only that Emily now carried an air of respect they didn't know how to challenge. Throughout the afternoon, Emily moved with the same calm determination. During obstacle courses, she seemed slower than the fastest recruits at first, but her efficiency was unmatched. She calculated each jump, each climb, each crawl with precision. While others rushed and wasted energy, Emily conserved hers, moving in a way that suggested she could continue indefinitely. Holloway watched and made mental notes. He could see the methods, the discipline, the training. It was far beyond standard army routines. Later, as the day ended, Emily returned to the barracks quietly. The chatter from earlier in the day had almost completely stopped. Even Jenkins, the loudest critic, sat silently, his curiosity replacing his usual teasing. Emily didn't gloat or react. She cleaned her boots methodically, folded her uniform with care, and prepared for the next day's exercises. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and purposeful, every action reflecting years of training beyond what anyone here could comprehend. That evening, as the barracks settled into silence, Emily sat on her bunk, rubbing her shoulder and reflecting on the day. The other recruits were already asleep or whispering quietly. She thought about the snake tattoo, the recognition from the colonel, and the subtle respect that had begun to grow among her peers. She didn't need to speak, didn't need to display strength. It was already evident in every controlled movement, every deliberate glance, and every calm breath she took. Holloway, observing from a distance, knew that Emily's story was far from over. The other recruits would continue to underestimate her, but that would not last. When the time came, they would see her skills, her training, and the courage she carried with her. The silence on the training field was just temporary, a pause before the revelation that would change everything. For Emily, the teasing, the laughter, and the doubt from others were meaningless. She had endured far worse in her past missions. She had survived situations most could never imagine. This was simply another day, another test of patience and resilience. And as she prepared for the next session, she knew one thing clearly. She was ready for whatever came next. The day ended with Emily lying on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, her arms still aching faintly, her mind calm and focused. The snake tattoo was more than ink. It was proof of her history, proof of the missions she had endured, proof of the skills and training that no one in the barracks yet understood. Holloway had seen it, recognized it, and now, quietly, the seeds of respect were planted among those who had mocked her. And soon they would all understand, but not yet. The evening was quiet at Fort Bragg, but Emily Carter's mind was far from still. She had returned to her bunk after the day's training, her muscles aching, especially her right shoulder and arm. It was a familiar pain, one that reminded her of missions long past, of challenges far greater than anything she faced here. While other recruits complained about soreness or exhaustion, Emily didn't. Pain was nothing new to her. It was just another test of endurance, another reminder of what she had already survived. The other recruits continued to whisper and speculate about her. Some were curious about her calm demeanor, others about her persistence despite struggling in PT. Jenkins, in particular, kept glancing at her, still confused by her quiet strength. He couldn't understand why she didn't fight back when teased, why she didn't make excuses, or why she didn't crumble under pressure. To him, it didn't make sense. Emily, however, knew the truth. She had endured far worse. Years before, she had been part of missions that pushed her body and mind to the absolute limit. These weren't ordinary military exercises. They were real combat situations, life or death scenarios that required absolute discipline, unwavering focus, and endurance beyond measure. The injuries she carried weren't minor. They were the remnants of those operations. Nerve damage, muscle strain, and lingering pain were constant reminders of her past. As she sat on her bunk, Emily gently stretched her shoulder. Every movement was careful, deliberate. She flexed her fingers and rotated her wrist slowly, assessing how much strain her arm could handle. It wasn't just about pain, it was about control. Years of intense training had taught her how to move efficiently, how to protect injuries while still performing at a high level. To the untrained eye, her struggles in PT looked like weakness. To anyone who truly understood, they were evidence of resilience. Colonel Holloway had already noticed the subtle signs. He could see that Emily's form, her posture, her attention to detail, everything about her was different from the average recruit. Most soldiers who struggled physically also struggled mentally under teasing and pressure. Emily did not. She was alert, composed, and methodical. Holloway knew enough to recognize that her physical challenges were real, but her skill, focus, and mental toughness were extraordinary. Emily's thoughts drifted back to one particularly intense mission overseas. It had been a covert rescue operation under conditions so extreme that most soldiers would have broken down. Exhaustion, heat, cold, and the constant threat of enemy forces had pushed her body to its limits. Her injuries had come from that mission. A shoulder torn in a fall, nerves damaged during extraction operations, muscles overstrained from carrying wounded teammates to safety. She had survived, but the scars remained, both visible and invisible. She remembered the moment she had first considered re-enlisting. After the mission, she had tried to settle into civilian life, but it never felt right. The adrenaline, the purpose, the teamwork, it was missing. She wanted to continue serving, but under a new identity, to start fresh. Here at Fort Bragg, no one knew her history. No one could see the skills and experience she carried with her. That had been the plan. Stay quiet, work hard, and let her actions speak when necessary. When she had revealed the snake tattoo to Colonel Holloway, it had been more than a simple gesture. That symbol wasn't just ink on her arm. It was recognition of everything she had endured and accomplished. It was a mark earned through danger, precision, and courage. A mark that few people would ever understand, and even fewer could appreciate. Holloway had recognized it immediately, and she knew he understood the full weight of her experience. Emily's PT struggles suddenly made sense to the colonel. The excuses she had given, nerve trauma, old damage, were not lies or weakness. They were real, reminders of a past full of danger and survival. Her slow times, her trembling arms during push-ups, her careful movements, all were consequences of real injuries from missions that tested her far beyond the normal limits of Army training. Most recruits would never experience such challenges, and few would understand the discipline required to continue performing despite them. As she cleaned her boots and folded her uniform, Emily thought about the recruits around her. They had mocked her, judged her without knowledge, and assumed she was weak. But soon enough they would understand. Not just the tattoo or the past missions, but the truth behind her resilience. When her skills and strength were revealed, the same people who laughed at her would recognize her for who she truly was. The night deepened, and the barracks grew quiet. Emily lay on her bunk, reflecting on her day and her journey. Her body ached, yes, but her mind was clear. She had survived dangerous missions, trained under extreme conditions, and endured injuries that could have ended her career. Nothing in this training, nothing in these PT exercises, could compare to what she had already overcome. She reached under her pillow and touched the small notebook she had kept. It contained notes, reminders, and plans, not for school or work, but for strategy, discipline, and improvement. She had always prepared meticulously, a habit ingrained during her Black Ops missions. Every action she took, every thought she had, was guided by precision and purpose. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more teasing from the recruits, and more physical demands. But Emily was ready. She didn't need recognition or validation from anyone. Her strength, her history, and her endurance were her own. When the time came, the other soldiers would see the truth behind her injuries, her calm composure, and the extraordinary training that few could match. And in that moment, lying quietly in the dim barracks light, Emily Carter felt a rare sense of calm. She had faced the worst. She had survived. And now, she was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to her reality. The next morning, the training field was alive with activity. The sun was warm on the recruits' backs, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat, earth, and determination. Emily Carter joined the formation, as always calm, focused, and composed. She stood at the edge of the line, not out of fear or weakness, but by choice, observing the movements and energy of the others. Around her, the recruits whispered, still unsure what to make of her. Some were curious, some confused, and some quietly respectful without realizing why. The morning's drills began with a 2-mile run, the usual start to test endurance and resilience. Emily fell into her steady pace at the back, letting the faster recruits move ahead. This time there were fewer jokes and less laughter. The memory of the tattoo, the black snake coiled around a dagger, and the colonel's reaction had spread subtly through the group. While most didn't understand it, instinctively, they sensed something different about her, something powerful. "Keep moving, Carter," someone called out. But there was no mockery in the voice. It was neutral, almost cautious. Emily didn't react, maintaining her steady rhythm. Her breathing was controlled, her eyes forward, her movements deliberate. Every step, every breath, every motion spoke of experience far beyond the training field. By the time she reached the finish line, Emily was still behind the fastest runners, but there was a change in the way the recruits reacted. No one laughed. No one mocked. Instead, there was a quiet pause, an unspoken acknowledgement of her presence. The same soldiers who had once pointed and teased now stepped aside, some watching her carefully. Respect had quietly begun to replace ridicule. The push-ups and sit-ups that followed were equally revealing. Emily performed them carefully, her arm shaking slightly from old injuries, yet her form remained perfect. She executed every movement with precision, conserving energy, protecting herself while still completing each set. The recruits who had once mocked her now found themselves in awe, even if they couldn't explain why. Her quiet strength was impossible to ignore. Colonel Holloway watched from the sidelines, his eyes sharp and calculating. He had already recognized Emily's past, her experience, and her skills. Today, however, he also observed the effect she had on the others. The soldiers were beginning to realize that she wasn't just another recruit. She was someone extraordinary. He knew that the respect being born on the field was genuine, earned not through words, but through quiet competence, discipline, and resilience. After the exercises, the recruits were dismissed to the barracks for a short break. Emily walked calmly, her uniform tidy, boots clean, and head held high. She didn't gloat or seek acknowledgement, but the subtle nods from a few recruits indicated a shift. They were no longer laughing. They were noticing her, silently questioning themselves about the judgments they had made. In the barracks, Emily took her usual place, sitting quietly on her bunk. She cleaned her gear methodically, tying laces, brushing dust off her boots, and folding her uniform with care. Every motion was deliberate, purposeful. The soldiers around her began to whisper less, replaced by glances of curiosity and quiet admiration. Some even mimicked her disciplined movements unconsciously, inspired by her example. Later in the day, Colonel Holloway approached Emily personally. His face was serious, but there was a hint of approval in his eyes. "Private Carter," he said, his voice low but firm, "you've earned something today that most soldiers never achieve. The respect of your peers, not through words, but through your actions." Emily nodded, her calm demeanor unchanged. She didn't need accolades or recognition. The acknowledgement from Holloway was enough. She understood that respect was earned silently, through endurance, skill, and resilience, exactly the way she had lived her life. The other recruits were watching from a distance. They couldn't fully understand the conversation, but the weight of it was clear. The same person they had laughed at, mocked, and assumed weak was now being acknowledged by one of the most respected officers on base. Their perception of her had completely changed. As the day went on, Emily continued with the drills and tasks, her movements smooth, her attention precise. When interacting with the others, she remained polite, calm, and composed. She didn't need to prove anything verbally. Her presence and competence were proof enough. Slowly, her peers began to approach her differently, no longer with mockery, but with cautious curiosity, tentative questions, and even requests for guidance. By evening, the barracks were quiet again. Emily sat on her bunk, her shoulder and arm still aching from the day's exertions. She reflected quietly, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From the dangerous missions of the past, the injuries, the years of training, and now the beginning of a new chapter in her military career. She had endured, survived, and quietly proven herself. The soldiers who had once mocked her would remember this day. The laughter had ended, replaced with respect. Not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through perseverance, skill, and unspoken strength. Emily Carter didn't need to announce her past or display her Black Ops background. Her actions spoke for her, and they spoke louder than any words ever could. Colonel Holloway watched from the doorway as she settled for the night. He knew that Emily's journey was far from over, but he also knew that today, she had achieved something rare, the acknowledgement of her peers, and a position of silent authority among them. The same recruits who had doubted her now recognized her for what she truly was. A soldier who had endured the unimaginable, survived, and continued to excel with quiet dignity. Emily lay down on her bunk, exhausted but content. Her thoughts were calm, focused, and proud. She had survived the judgment, endured the physical challenges, and earned respect without needing to fight or argue. She closed her eyes, her mind at ease, knowing that the next day, and the days after, she would continue to demonstrate the strength, skill, and resilience that defined her. And for the first time in this new chapter of her life, the laughter had ended. It was replaced by recognition, respect, and the quiet knowledge that Emily Carter was someone extraordinary. Not just a recruit, but a soldier who carried the weight of her past, the skill of her training, and the quiet authority of someone who had truly survived.